The metallic screech of keys against paint echoed through the parking garage like nails on a chalkboard. Marcus watched in horror as his pristine BMW's side panel was carved with deep, vengeful scratches. But as Detective Ray Hoffman emerged, from the shadows, cigarette dangling from his lips, Marcus had no idea he'd just vandalized the car of a man who knew exactly how to make fires look like accidents, and who had 23 years of police arson investigation experience to do it legally. The match hadn't been lit yet, but the fuse was already burning. Detective Ray Hoffman had seen enough burned-out husks of cars in his 23 years with the arson squad to know that fires were rarely about the flames themselves. They were about rage, desperation, and the precise moment when a person's patience finally snapped like an overstretched rubber band. He just never thought he'd be the one holding the match. The morning had started like any other Tuesday in downtown Seattle. Rain hammered the concrete with the persistence of a debt collector, and Ray's ancient Crown Victoria wheezed into the underground parking garage of his apartment complex like it was taking its last breath. Apartment 4B had been home for 3 years, now ever since the divorce papers were signed and Karen had claimed the house in Bellevue along with half his pension. Ray guided his car toward his assigned spot, number 47, the one he paid an extra $50 a month for because it was close to the elevator, but as he rounded the corner, his jaw tightened. A silver BMW sat smugly in his space, its pristine paint job gleaming under the fluorescent lights like it was posing for a magazine cover. "Son of a bitch," Ray muttered, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. He'd dealt with this before. The apartment complex was full of entitled tech bros who treated parking spots like suggestions rather than assignments. Usually he'd find another spot and leave a polite note. Usually his patience held. But today wasn't usual. Today marked exactly 1 year since the Riverside Elementary fire, the case that had haunted his dreams and cost him his promotion. Today, his ex-wife was getting remarried to her yoga instructor. Today, his doctor had called with concerning test results. That required a follow-up appointment. Ray parked in visitor parking and sat in his car for a moment, watching the BMW through his rain-streaked windshield. The license plate read Crypto 1. Of course it did. He grabbed his phone and called the building's towing service, but got an automated message saying they were backed up until Thursday. 2 days. This jackass would squat in his spot for 2 whole days. Ray climbed out of his car and walked over to the BMW, peering through the windows. The interior was immaculate cream leather seats, not a coffee stain or crumb in sight. A parking permit hung from the rearview mirror, but it was for spot 73, clear on the other side of the garage. "Lazy bastard," Ray said under his breath. He pulled out his phone and snapped photos of the car, the license plate, and the parking permit. Then he trudged to the elevator, his shoes squelching against the concrete. The day was young, but Ray already felt like he'd run a marathon. 3 hours later, Ray returned from a grocery run to find the BMW still occupying his spot. But now, there was a new addition, a young man in his late 20s, leaning against the car, talking loudly into his phone about disrupting the fintech space and scaling. He wore the uniform of Seattle's tech elite, expensive sneakers, designer jeans, and a hoodie that probably cost more than Ray's monthly car payment. Marcus Chen had the kind of confidence that came from never being told no, the kind that was earned through venture capital and inherited trust funds rather than late nights and early mornings. His voice carried across the parking garage like he owned the play switch. Ray realized with growing irritation he probably did. The BMW's key fob dangled from his finger like a weapon. "Excuse me," Ray called out, approaching with the measured pace he'd perfected during countless interrogations. Marcus glanced up from his phone conversation. "Yeah, hold on, Kevin," he said into the device. "Some old guy wants to chat." Old guy. Ray felt something cold settle in his chest. "That's my parking spot," Ray said, pointing to the painted number 47 on the concrete. Marcus looked down at the number, then back at Ray with the kind of smirk that usually preceded a lawsuit. "This? Yeah, my spot was taken, so I grabbed this one, supply and demand, you know, market forces. Your spot is 73. I saw your permit. Look, dude, I pay $12,000 a month for my apartment. I think that buys me a little parking flexibility." Marcus raised his phone back to his ear. "Sorry, Kevin. Where were we?" Ray stood there for a moment, rain dripping from his jacket. Onto the concrete. In his career, he'd arrested murderers, arsonists, and every flavor of scumbag in between. He'd maintained his composure through crime scenes that would make most people vomit. But something about Marcus's casual dismissal, the way he'd reduced Ray to an inconvenience. A speed bump in his day made Ray's vision narrow to a tunnel. "Move your car," Ray said quietly. Marcus held up a finger in the universal gesture. "Wait, Kevin, I'm gonna have to call you back. I've got a situation here." He ended the call and looked at Ray with theatrical patience. "Listen, old-timer, I get it. Change is hard, but this is how the world works now. Adapt or get left." Behind, Ray took a step closer. "I'm 47, not 70, and I asked you politely to move your car, and I politely explained why that's not happening." Marcus's smirk widened. "What are you gonna do? Call the cops?" Ray pulled out his badge wallet and flipped it open. "I am the cops." For just a moment, Marcus's confidence wavered. But then, he laughed a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, this is Rich, a parking spot cop. Let me guess, you peaked in high school." The words hit Ray like a physical blow. Every failure, every missed promotion, every night he'd come home to an empty apartment crystallized into pure white-hot rage. His hand moved to his hip, where his service weapon usually rested, but he was off duty. Instead, his fingers found his car keys. "Last chance," Ray said. Marcus pulled out his own keys and made a show of clicking the BMW's lock button. Or what? Ray stared at him for a long moment, memorizing every detail of Marcus's face. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the concrete canyon of the parking garage. Behind him, Marcus called out, "That's what I thought, Rint." Ray made it to the elevator before the red haze cleared from his vision. His hands were shaking not from fear, but from the effort of restraint. In the reflection of the elevator's polished steel doors, he looked like a stranger. His face was flushed, his eyes were too bright, and there was something predatory in his expression that would have made his ex-wife take a step back. The elevator climbed toward his apartment, and with each floor, Ray's anger crystallized into something colder and more dangerous. Marcus Chen had just made the worst mistake of his privileged life. He'd assumed that being a cop meant Ray played by the same rules as everyone else. But Ray knew something that Marcus didn't. The best revenge wasn't illegal, it was just creative. And Ray had spent over 2 decades learning exactly how fires started and how to make them look like anything but arson. 20 minutes later, Ray returned to the parking garage with a small digital camera and a notebook. He photographed the BMW from every angle, noted the tire specifications, and even checked the oil stain pattern on the concrete. To any observer, he was just a cop being thorough. But Ray wasn't investigating a crime. He was planning one. Ray's apartment was a shrine to controlled combustion. The walls were lined with photographs from crime scenes, twisted metal, charred wood, and the ghostly outlines where furniture used to stand. Each image told a story of destruction, and Ray knew how to read them like scripture. He spread the photographs of Marcus's BMW across his kitchen table like tarot cards predicting a very specific future. The car was a 2023 BMW M4 competition machine worth more than Ray's annual salary. Marcus had probably bought it with cryptocurrency gains, another symbol of unearned privilege that made Ray's teeth ache. But every machine had weaknesses, and Ray had spent decades learning exactly where to find them. His laptop hummed to life, and Ray began his research with the methodical patience of a predator. BMW M4 recalls common electrical faults, fire incidents. The internet was a treasure trove of technical specifications and owner complaints, and Ray absorbed every detail. Like a sponge, the M4 had a known issue with the Hypersure fuel pump. Under certain conditions, extreme heat, electrical surge, manufacturing defect, the pump could fail catastrophically. The resulting fuel spray could ignite if it contacted the turbocharger housing, which ran at temperatures exceeding 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Ray leaned back in his chair, a cold smile spreading across his face. In the right circumstances, with the right sequence of events, that car was a bomb waiting for someone to light the fuse. His phone buzzed with a text from his ex-wife Ray. "I know today is hard. I hope you're okay." He stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Karen's pity was the last thing he needed right now. The next morning, Ray arrived at the parking garage at 6 a.m., a full hour before Marcus typically left for work. The BMW sat in spot 47 like a metallic middle finger, and Ray felt his resolve harden into something unbreakable. He'd brought tools, not the obvious kind that would make security cameras suspicious, but the subtle ones that came with 23 years of investigating car fires. A digital multimeter, a small LED flashlight, a set of precision picks that looked like dentist tools, but were designed for accessing tight electrical connections. Ray popped the BMW's hood with practiced ease. The engine bay was pristine, all gleaming metal and plastic covers that hid the car's mechanical complexity. But Ray knew exactly where to look. The Hypersure fuel pump was accessible through a service panel, and the electrical connection was secured with a single plastic clip. Ray examined the wiring harness with his flashlight, noting the gauge of the wires and the type of insulation. Then he made a single, precise modification so small that it would be invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. A tiny nick in the insulation, just enough to create a potential short circuit under the right conditions. Ray replaced the service panel and closed the hood, leaving no trace of his presence except for microscopic metal filings that would be impossible to detect without a full forensic examination. The modification wouldn't cause an immediate fire that would be too obvious. Instead, it would create a vulnerability that could be triggered remotely under controlled conditions. But Ray wasn't finished. True artistry required layers. He knelt beside the car's rear wheel and examined the brake caliper. High-performance vehicles like the M4 generated enormous amounts of heat during aggressive driving, and the brake system was designed to dissipate that heat safely. But if certain components were slightly misaligned, a heat shield was bent in a way that directed hot air toward fuel lines instead of away from them. The margin of safety could disappear entirely. Ray made another microscopic adjustment, bending a piece of metal by less than an inch. To any observer, it would look like normal wear and tear from urban driving. But combined with his first modification, it created a chain reaction waiting to happen. The parking garage's security camera swept across the area in a predictable pattern, and Ray timed his movements to stay in the blind spots. After 15 minutes, he packed up his tools and walked away, looking like nothing more than a resident checking his tire pressure. Phase 1 was complete. Now came the waiting. Marcus emerged from the elevator at 7:30 a.m., coffee in one hand and his phone. In the other, he was deep in conversation about leveraging blockchain solutions for supply chain optimization, whatever the hell that meant. Ray watched from his car as Marcus climbed into the BMW and drove away, completely oblivious to the time bomb ticking beneath his hood. But Ray's plan required more than mechanical sabotage. It required perfect timing, and that meant he needed to know Marcus's patterns, his routines, his weaknesses. For the next 3 days, Ray became a ghost. He followed Marcus from a distance, learning his habits like a behavioral analyst. Morning coffee at a pretentious place called Artisanal Grounds, where a latte cost $12. Lunch meetings at trendy restaurants in South Lake Union, evening drinks with other tech bros who talked about disrupting industries they'd never worked in. Marcus was predictable in the way that entitled people often were. He assumed the world would bend around his schedule, so he never bothered to vary his routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he drove to a private gym in Bellevue, pushing the BMW hard through the winding roads of Mercer Island. The car's engine would be hot, the brake system stressed, all the conditions perfect for Ray's modifications to take effect. But Ray needed more than an accident. He needed Marcus to understand exactly why it was happening. On Thursday evening, Ray sat in his Crown Victoria across from the parking garage entrance, watching Marcus return from his gym session. The BMW's engine ticked and pinged as it cooled, heat radiating from the hood in visible waves. Marcus climbed out of the car, still wearing his workout clothes, and headed for the elevator without a backward glance. Ray waited 10 minutes, then approached the BMW with a small device in his hand, a commercial-grade electromagnetic pulse generator, the kind used by electronics repair shops to test circuit resilience. He'd modified it slightly, boosting its output beyond safe parameters. He placed the device against the car's fender, directly above the fuel pump wiring harness, and pressed the activation button. The pulse was invisible and silent, but Ray knew it would find the weak point he'd created in the insulation. The damaged wire would heat up, creating a small arc that would slowly degrade the surrounding plastic. Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But soon, Ray pocketed the device and walked away, his heart hammering with the kind of adrenaline rush he hadn't felt since his rookie days on patrol. He was playing with fire literally, but for the first time in months, he felt truly alive. Back in his apartment, Ray opened a bottle of whiskey and sat down at his computer. He had one final preparation to make, and it required the kind of bureaucratic expertise that came with decades in law enforcement. He began typing an incident report, predating it by 2 weeks and backdating the electronic timestamp using techniques he'd learned in a cybercrime seminar. The report documented a complaint about a suspicious individual tampering with vehicles in the parking garage, filed by an anonymous resident who'd witnessed someone acting strangely around a silver BMW. The report was completely fabricated, but it would create a paper trail that established Ray as a conscientious detective, investigating potential criminal activity rather than perpetrating it. When the fire happened, not if, but when Ray would be the lead investigator on a case where he was technically the victim of the crime he'd solved. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Ray would investigate his own revenge, and his 23 years of experience would ensure that the fire looked exactly like what it was supposed to be. A tragic accident caused by a known manufacturing defect, exacerbated by aggressive driving and poor maintenance. The whiskey burned his throat as he raised the glass in a mock toast. "To Marcus Chen," he said aloud. "May you get exactly what you deserve." Outside his window, Seattle's skyline glittered with the lights of 1,000 tech companies, each one filled with people who thought money could insulate them from consequences. But Ray knew better. Fire was democratic. It consumed rich and poor with equal enthusiasm. And sometimes, if you knew exactly how to light it, fire could be justice. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, jolting Ray from the first decent sleep he'd had in weeks. His phone buzzed against the nightstand like an angry wasp, and he fumbled for it in the darkness. "Hoffman," he answered, his voice rough with sleep and whiskey. "Ray, it's dispatch. We've got a vehicle fire in your building's parking garage. Captain wants you on scene." Ray sat up in bed, his heart suddenly hammering. Too soon. It was too goddamn soon. His modifications were designed to create a slow degradation, not an immediate failure. Something had gone wrong. "On my way," he said, already reaching for his clothes. The parking garage was chaos. Fire trucks filled the entrance, their red and blue lights painting the concrete walls in violent colors. Ray showed his badge to the perimeter officer and ducked under the crime scene tape, his mind racing through possibilities. But as he rounded the corner toward spot 47, his blood turned to ice water. It wasn't the BMW. A Honda Civic sat in the space where Marcus's car should have been. Its engine compartment, a twisted mass of melted plastic and charred metal. Fire suppression foam covered everything like artificial snow, and the acrid smell of burned electronics filled the air. "What the hell?" Ray whispered. "Detective Hoffman?" A young officer approached, his face smudged with soot. "I'm Officer Martinez, this is Weird the car's owner, says someone was messing with vehicles down here. Filed a complaint about it 2 weeks ago." Ray's fabricated report, the one he'd backdated to establish his cover story. "What complaint?" Martinez consulted. His notepad, anonymous tip about suspicious activity. Someone tampering with cars. The complainant specifically mentioned a silver BMW, but this Honda was parked right next to where that BMW usually sits. Ray's mind worked furiously. Marcus must have switched spots again, parking in a different location and leaving some poor bastard in the crossfire. The Honda's owner had become collateral damage in a war they knew nothing about. "Anyone hurt?" Ray asked. Car's owner was upstairs asleep. Lucky break if he'd been driving when this happened. Martinez shook his head. "Fire department says it looks electrical. Fuel pump failure, maybe, but the pattern's weird." Ray knelt beside the Honda's engine bay, pulling out his flashlight. The damage was extensive, but his trained eye could read the burn patterns like a story. The fire had started near the fuel system, exactly where his modifications should have taken effect. But the wiring harness was completely wrong. This was a different car, different manufacturer, different vulnerabilities. Entirely. "Shit," he breathed. "Sir, nothing. Just, what time did this start?" Neighbor called it in around 2:30, said she heard a small explosion, then saw flames. Martinez pointed toward the apartments. Mrs. Chen, in 3A, she was pretty shaken up. Chen. Ray's blood chilled. Did you say Chen? Yeah. Ray stood slowly, pieces clicking into place like bullets sliding into a chamber. Mrs. Chen, the Honda's registration would show the owner's name, and Ray was willing to bet his pension that it would be someone related to Marcus. A parent, maybe, or a relative who'd borrowed the parking spot. I need to see the registration, Ray said. Martinez handed him the paperwork, and Ray scanned it quickly. The owner was listed as David Chen, age 67, with an address matching apartment 3A. Father. Ray closed his eyes, feeling the weight of what he'd done settling on his chest like a concrete slab. An innocent man's car had been destroyed because Ray's modifications had found the wrong target. The electromagnetic pulse he'd used to trigger the degradation process had been powerful enough to affect nearby vehicles, and the Honda had been parked close enough to receive a lethal dose. But the worst part wasn't the mistake. It was that the plan had worked perfectly, just on the wrong victim. Detective Martinez's voice seemed to come from very far away. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Ray forced himself to focus. I'm fine. Have you interviewed the owner, Mr. Chen? Yeah, he's pretty upset. Says the car was his late wife's. Only thing he had left of her. Martinez lowered his voice. Guy's been crying for an hour. It's heartbreaking. The words hit Ray like physical blows. He'd destroyed more than just a car. He'd obliterated someone's connection to their dead spouse, their final memento of a life shared and lost. The weight of it made his knees weak. I need to talk to him, Ray said. Apartment 3A was modest and neat, filled with the kind of careful organization that comes from living alone after decades of partnership. David Chen sat on his couch, still, in his pajamas, holding a framed photograph of a smiling woman in her 60s. His eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted. Mr. Chen. I'm Detective Hoffman. I'm investigating what happened to your car. David looked up, and Ray saw his own father's face reflected in the older man's grief. Someone did this on purpose, David said quietly. I know it. What makes you say that? The car was running fine yesterday. I drove it to the grocery store to visit my wife's grave. No problems. David's voice cracked. That Honda was the last gift I gave her before she died. We picked it out together, chose the color she wanted, blue, because it matched her favorite dress. Ray felt something breaking inside his chest. Mr. Chen, 38 years of marriage. Detective, 38 years. And that car was the only thing that still smelled like her perfume. David wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Now it's gone, and I don't know how to get her back. Ray stared at the photograph in David's hands. A woman with kind eyes and laugh lines. Someone who'd probably spent her life taking care of others. Someone who'd never hurt anyone, never stolen a parking spot, never dismissed another human being as an inconvenience. We'll find out what happened, Ray said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Will you? Because I think someone in this building has been targeting cars. My son Marcus said there was some trouble with parking spots, some argument with another tenant. David looked up at Ray with desperate hope. Maybe they got confused, went after the wrong car. Ray's vision tunneled. Marcus had told his father about their confrontation, which meant David knew exactly who might be responsible. If the old man started connecting dots, if he remembered Ray's face from the parking garage, your son mentioned a specific person. Some detective who lives upstairs. Marcus said the guy was acting strange, taking pictures of cars. David's eyes narrowed. You wouldn't happen to know who that might be, would you? Ray felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. His cover story was unraveling in real time, and David Chen was looking at him with growing suspicion. In the space of a few hours, Ray had gone from predator to prey, and the worst part was that he deserved every moment of the terror now clawing at his throat. I'll look into it, Ray said, backing toward the door. Detective. David's voice stopped him cold. That man, whoever he is, he didn't just destroy my car. He destroyed my last connection to the woman I loved. I hope you find him, because when you do, I want to look him in the eye and ask him one question. What's that? David's voice dropped to a whisper, but every word cut like a blade. Was it worth it? Was whatever petty grievance he had worth taking away the last piece of someone's heart? Ray fled the apartment, his chest tight and his hands shaking. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall and tried to breathe, but the air felt thin and poisonous. He'd wanted justice, wanted to teach Marcus Chen a lesson about consequences and respect. Instead, he'd become the monster he'd spent his career hunting. His phone buzzed with a text message, and Ray looked down to see Marcus's name on the screen. The message was simple, but it made Ray's blood turn to ice. "I know what you did. We need to talk." Ray stared at the text message until the words burned themselves into his retinas. His hands trembled as he typed back, "I don't know what you're talking about." The response came immediately. "Parking garage, level B2. Now come alone, or I call internal affairs." Ray's throat went dry. Level B2 was the lowest level of the garage, mostly unused except for storage and maintenance equipment. It was also far enough from the fire scene that their conversation wouldn't be overheard by the responding officers still working upstairs. He took the stairs down, each step feeling like a march toward his own execution. The fluorescent lights on B2 flickered intermittently, casting the concrete space in strobing shadows that made everything look like a crime scene photograph. Marcus stood beside a utility closet, no longer the cocky tech bro from their first encounter. His expensive clothes were rumpled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes held the kind of hollow shock that Ray had seen in the faces of people who'd lost everything in a fire. "My father's upstairs crying over a burned-out Honda," Marcus said. "Without preamble, you want to explain that." Ray kept his expression neutral, falling back on decades of interrogation training. "Your father's car was destroyed in what appears to be an electrical fire. I'm investigating. Cut the shit." Marcus stepped closer, and Ray could smell the desperation on him like smoke. "I saw you that first day, taking pictures of my car. I saw you following me for a week, and I sure as hell didn't miss the way you looked when you realized you'd torched the wrong vehicle." Ray's mind raced. Marcus was fishing, building a case on circumstantial evidence and intuition. But the fact that he'd noticed the surveillance meant Ray had been sloppier than he'd thought. "You're upset about your father's loss," Ray said carefully. "That's understandable. But accusations." "My mother died 18 months ago," Marcus interrupted, his voice cracking. "Lung cancer. She fought it for 3 years, and my dad nursed her through every single day of chemotherapy. Radiation, the whole nightmare that Honda was the last thing they bought together." Ray felt the words like physical blows, each one driving the knife deeper into his conscience. "Marcus, he still sits in that car sometimes, just sits there in the parking garage talking to her." Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "He thinks, I don't know, but I see him. This broken old man having conversations with a ghost because it's the only place she still feels real to him." Ray closed his eyes, seeing David Chen's tear-stained face, hearing his voice crack as he talked about perfume and blue dresses. "Sorry for your loss, are you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you tried to destroy my car and accidentally murdered my father's last connection to his dead wife." Marcus's voice rose to an echo in the concrete space. "So I'll ask you, again, what the hell did you do?" The weight of guilt was crushing Ray's chest, making it hard to breathe. He'd spent his entire career seeking justice for victims, and now he was the one inflicting senseless harm on innocent people. The irony was so bitter, it tasted like ash. "It was supposed to be your car," Ray said quietly. Marcus went very still. "What? Your BMW? I modified the fuel system, created a vulnerability that would cause a fire under the right conditions." Ray looked Marcus in the eye, seeing his own moral collapse reflected back at him. "It was supposed to teach you a lesson about consequences. You tried to kill me." "No, the fire was designed to happen when the car was parked, not while you were driving. I'm not a murderer." Ray laughed bitterly. "At least I thought I wasn't." Marcus stared at him with a mixture of horror and fascination. "Why? Because of a fucking parking spot. Because you treated me like garbage. Because you looked at a human being and saw nothing worth respecting." Ray's voice grew stronger, fed by months of accumulated rage. "Because people like you think money gives you the right to walk over everyone else. So you decided to burn down my car. I decided to show you that actions have consequences, that you can't just take what you want without paying a price. Ray gestured toward the ceiling, where the smoke damage from David's Honda was still visible. But instead, I destroyed an innocent man's connection to his dead wife. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the confession. When he spoke, again, his voice was different, calmer, but somehow more dangerous. "You know what the funny thing is?" Marcus said. "You're right. I am an entitled asshole. I do think money makes me better than other people. And yeah, I treated you like shit because I could." Ray blinked, not expecting the admission. "But you know what else?" Marcus continued. "My father spent 40 years working construction to put me through school. He sacrificed everything: his health, his comfort, his own dreams, so I could have opportunities he never had. And that Honda, he bought it with his retirement savings, because my mother fell in love with the color." Ray felt his legs go weak. "So congratulations, detective. You wanted to teach me about consequences. Mission accomplished. The consequence of your little revenge plot is that a good man, the best man I know less, because you couldn't handle being disrespected by someone you considered beneath you." The words hit Ray like bullets, each one finding its mark with devastating precision. He'd thought he was fighting against privilege and entitlement, but he was just another bully with a badge, using his power to hurt people who couldn't fight back. "What do you want?" Ray asked. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Ray the screen. It displayed a recording app, the timer showing that it had been running for the past 10 minutes. "I want you to listen to your confession," Marcus said, pressing play. Ray's voice filled the concrete space. "It was supposed to be your car. I modified the fuel system, created a vulnerability that would cause a fire under the right conditions. It was supposed to teach you a lesson about consequences. 23 years as an arson investigator," Marcus said, stopping the recording. "You know exactly how much prison time someone gets for deliberately causing a vehicle fire, even if it was the wrong vehicle." Ray stared at the phone like it was a loaded gun. "You're going to destroy me, maybe? Or maybe we can work something out. What kind of arrangement?" Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it, the kind where, "You help me make this right? My father's car is gone, but the insurance payout won't cover what it meant to him, and money won't replace the emotional damage. I don't have that kind of money, no, but you have something more valuable. You have access." Marcus stepped closer. "You see, detective, I've been thinking about this situation, and I realized something interesting. If someone was systematically targeting vehicles in this parking garage, if there was a pattern of sabotage, then the building's insurance company would be liable for a lot more than just one Honda." Ray's blood went cold. "You want me to fake evidence? I want you to discover evidence. Evidence that shows this was part of a larger criminal conspiracy, not an isolated incident. Evidence that justifies a significant settlement for all the affected residents." Marcus's smile widened. "Including my father. That's fraud. That's justice. The kind you were trying to dispense when you decided to play God with people's lives." Marcus held up his phone. "The alternative is that I send this recording to Internal Affairs, the district attorney, and every news outlet in Seattle. How do you think that story plays? Veteran detective torches innocent man's car in parking spot revenge plot." Ray closed his eyes, seeing his career, his pension, his freedom all going up in flames. "You've got this all figured out. I'm good at problem solving. It's what they pay me for." Marcus pocketed his phone. "So what's it going to be, detective? Are you going to help me fix what you broke? Or do I need to find another way to get justice for my father?" Ray looked around the concrete tomb of level B2, feeling the walls closing in. He'd come down here as a detective investigating a crime, but he was leaving as a criminal being blackmailed by his victim. The wheel of justice had turned full circle, and Ray was about to be crushed beneath it. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. Ray sat in his apartment at 3 a.m., staring at the evidence files spread across his kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle designed in hell. Marcus's plan was elegant in its simplicity: create a pattern of vehicle tampering that would justify a massive insurance payout for the entire building. All Ray had to do was plant evidence, falsify reports, and destroy his own integrity to save his career. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd started this nightmare trying to teach Marcus about consequences, and now he was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. Sometimes the only way out of hell is to dig deeper. His laptop screen glowed with fabricated incident reports. 3 additional vehicles over the past 6 months, all showing signs of systematic sabotage by an unknown perpetrator targeting high-end vehicles. Ray had backdated the reports, altered security camera timestamps, and even planted microscopic evidence in the parking garage's maintenance logs. Every keystroke felt like another nail in his professional coffin, but the alternative was worse. Marcus's recording would end more than Ray's career, would send him to prison for arson, destroy his pension, and leave him with nothing but the knowledge that he'd ruined an innocent man's life over a parking spot. The worst part was how easy it was. 23 years of investigating crimes had taught Ray exactly how to commit them. He knew which evidence to plant, which details to include, which investigative dead ends would satisfy insurance adjusters. Without triggering a deeper probe, his phone buzzed. Another text from Marcus. "How's the paperwork coming? Dad's meeting with the insurance adjuster tomorrow?" Ray typed back. "It's done." "Good. One more thing we need to discuss: the ongoing investigation. Make sure our stories align." Ray closed his eyes. The ongoing investigation. Of course, Marcus wouldn't be satisfied with just framing some phantom saboteur. He wanted to control the entire narrative, which meant more meetings, more coordination, more opportunities for their conspiracy to unravel. A knock at Ray's door made him freeze. It was 3:17 a.m. No one visited at this hour, unless something was very wrong. Ray closed his laptop and walked to the door, his service weapon automatically finding his hand. Through the peephole, he saw David Chen standing in the hallway, still in his pajamas but with a coat thrown over them. The old man's face was streaked with tears, and he clutched something in his hands. Ray opened the door. "Mr. Chen, what's wrong?" "I couldn't sleep," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I keep thinking about what you said, about finding who did this, and I found something." Ray's throat went dry. "What kind of something?" David held up a small digital camera. "Security camera from my apartment window. I set it up after my wife died. I was worried about break-ins living alone." His hands shook as he operated the device. "It records everything in the parking garage. Everything." Ray felt the ground disappearing beneath his feet. David's apartment overlooked the garage. If his camera had captured Ray tampering with the vehicles, "I been going through the footage," David continued, "hours and hours looking for anything suspicious, and I found this." He turned the camera screen toward Ray, and Ray saw himself kneeling beside the Honda, his electromagnetic pulse device pressed against the car's fender. The timestamp showed the exact moment Ray had triggered the cascade failure that destroyed David's most precious possession. "That's you, isn't it?" David asked quietly. "The detective who was supposed to help me find who destroyed my wife's car." Ray stared at the screen, watching his own betrayal play out in grainy digital footage. There was no denying it, no explaining it away. The evidence was absolute. "Mr. Chen, 23 years on the force," David said, his voice growing stronger. "My son told me about you. Said you were a decorated detective, someone who spent his career catching the bad guys." David's eyes filled with tears. "So, tell me, detective, what does it feel like to become the thing you spent your life fighting?" Ray had no answer. The question hung in the air between them like smoke from a funeral pyre. "I know why you did it," David continued. "Marcus told me about the parking spot, about how he treated you. My son can be ... difficult, entitled. He gets that from his mother's side of the family." David smiled sadly. "But you didn't just try to hurt him. You destroyed the last piece of my heart." "I'm sorry," Ray whispered. The words felt pathetic, inadequate for the magnitude of his crime. "Are you, because I've been thinking about this all night, and I realized something." David stepped closer, and Ray saw steel in the old man's eyes. "You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you got caught." The accusation hit Ray like a physical blow because it was true. Even now, even faced with the evidence of his destruction, part of him still felt justified. Marcus had been an asshole. Marcus had deserved consequences. The fact that David had paid the price didn't change that fundamental truth. "What do you want?" Ray asked. "I want you to understand what you took from me." David's voice cracked. "That car wasn't just metal and glass. It was Saturday morning drives to the farmer's market. It was the place where she told me she was pregnant with Marcus. It was where we had our first fight as newlyweds and our last conversation before the cancer took her voice." Ray closed his eyes, but David's words painted pictures he couldn't escape. 38 years of marriage, detective, 38 years of memories, and you burned them all because my son hurt your feelings. David wiped his eyes. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to confess, you're going to face the consequences of what you did, and you're going to spend whatever time you have left trying to make amends for the damage you've caused. And if I don't, David held up the camera, then I take this to the FBI, not the local police, the federal authorities. Because this isn't just arson anymore, is it? It's conspiracy, evidence, tampering, insurance fraud. My son showed me the reports you've been filing, the fake incidents you've been documenting. Ray's blood turned to ice. How did he? Marcus is smarter than you think. Smarter than I taught him to be, maybe. David's expression hardened. He hacked into your computer, detective, downloaded everything. Your fabricated reports, your falsified evidence, your entire conspiracy to defraud the insurance company. Ray felt his knees go weak. Marcus had played him perfectly, using Ray's guilt and desperation to manipulate him into creating evidence of an even bigger crime. The blackmail hadn't been the endgame, had been the setup. You see, David continued, my son might be entitled, but he's not cruel. When he realized what you'd done, his first instinct was to protect you, to find a way to make this right, without destroying your life. David's voice grew cold. But I'm not my son. I don't believe in protecting people from the consequences of their actions. Ray stared at the old man, seeing a steel core beneath the grief-stricken exterior. David Chen wasn't just a victim, he was a father whose son had been threatened, a widower whose final connection to his wife had been severed by a corrupt cop's petty revenge. You have 24 hours, David said, turning to leave. Confess, or I do it for you. Ray watched him walk away, then closed the door and leaned against it, his mind reeling. Marcus's text messages, his blackmail scheme, even his demand for fake evidence, it had all been theater. The real trap had been sprung the moment David Chen decided to review his security footage. Ray looked at his laptop, at the fabricated reports that would now serve as evidence of his corruption rather than his cooperation. He'd thought he was the hunter, then the hunted, but the truth was simpler and more devastating. He'd been the prey all along. His phone buzzed with one final message from Marcus. My dad found his security camera footage. You have until tomorrow morning to turn yourself in, or he goes to the feds. I tried to give you an out, detective. I really did, but some people can only learn the hard way. Ray deleted the message and walked to his kitchen window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. Somewhere in those glittering towers were the offices of federal prosecutors who would soon be very interested in a corrupt police detective who'd committed arson, evidence tampering, and insurance fraud. Tomorrow, Ray would face the same choice he'd given Marcus in that parking garage: adapt or get left behind. The difference was, Ray's consequences would be measured in years, not money. And unlike Marcus's BMW, there would be no insurance policy to cover the damage. Ray stood in the parking garage at dawn, watching the sunrise paint the concrete walls in shades of orange and gold. In 6 hours, David Chen would walk into the FBI field office with security footage that would end Ray's life as he knew it. In 6 hours, 23 years of service would be reduced to a case number in a federal prosecutor's file. But Ray wasn't thinking about prison or disgrace or the pension he'd lose. He was thinking about David Chen sitting in a burned-out Honda, talking to his dead wife. The Honda's remains had been towed away, but the scorch marks on the concrete remained like a scar. Ray knelt in the empty parking space and ran his fingers along the blackened asphalt, feeling the texture of his own moral collapse under his fingertips. She would have forgiven you. Ray spun around to find David Chen standing by the elevator, dressed in a simple black suit. The old man walked slowly across the garage, each step echoing like a countdown. My wife, David continued, if she were here, she would have forgiven you. She believed people could change, could become better than their worst moments. He stopped a few feet away from Ray. I don't have her faith. Ray stood, brushing the soot from his hands. I'm going to confess. I know. Not because of your ultimatum, because it's the right thing to do. Ray looked David in the eye. Became everything I spent my career fighting against. That has to mean something. David nodded slowly. My son thinks I'm too hard on you. He thinks we should have found another way. Something that didn't involve destroying your life. Marcus is a better man than I gave him credit for. He learned that from his mother. The kindness, the belief in second chances. I taught him the other things: pride, stubbornness, the need for justice. David's eyes hardened. Sometimes those lessons conflict. Ray pulled out his phone and showed David the screen. It displayed a resignation letter addressed to the Seattle Police Department, already sent. I resigned an hour ago, effective immediately. That's not enough. No, it's not. Ray put the phone away. I've also prepared a full confession. Everything. Detail every crime, every moment where I chose revenge over justice. The FBI will have it within the hour. David studied Ray's face, looking for deception or manipulation. Why? Why confess when you could have run? You had 12 hours to disappear, because running would mean you were right about me, that I'm only sorry I got caught. Ray looked at the scorch marks on the concrete. I want to be sorry for the right reasons. The two men stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the ghosts of burned cars and broken trust. Finally, David spoke. The insurance company called yesterday. They're denying my claim. Ray's stomach dropped. What suspicious circumstances, they said. Too many coincidences, too much evidence of tampering. They think I'm running a scam. David's laugh was bitter. 40 years of paying premiums, and when I need them most, they think I'm a criminal. Ray felt the final piece of his soul crumble. His fabricated evidence, designed to justify an insurance payout, had backfired spectacularly. The very reports he'd created to help David had instead marked him as a suspect. I can fix this, Ray said desperately. I can tell them the truth, explain what really happened. The truth. David shook his head. The truth is that a corrupt police detective targeted vehicles in this garage as part of an elaborate revenge scheme. The truth is that my son was the intended victim, but an old man's car got destroyed instead. You think that makes the insurance company more likely to pay out? Ray closed his eyes, seeing the full scope of the destruction he'd caused. Not just the car, not just David's memories, but his financial security, his trust in the system, his faith that justice existed in the world. There has to be something there is. David reached into his jacket and pulled out a check, folded in half. My son wrote this. It covers the car's value, plus enough to help with my wife's medical bills that I'm still paying off. He held it out to Ray. He wants you to have it. Ray stared at the check like it was a snake. I can't take that. Why not? You destroyed my property. Marcus is offering compensation. It's the capitalist solution to a moral problem. David's voice dripped with sarcasm. Isn't that how people like him solve everything? People like him, rich, entitled, disconnected from consequences? David's expression softened slightly. Except he's not, is he? He's spending his own money to fix what you broke, even though he doesn't owe me anything. Even though you tried to destroy his life, Ray took the check with trembling hands. The amount was staggering enough to replace the Honda 10 times over, enough to clear David's debts and secure his future. It was also probably a significant portion of Marcus's net worth, given freely to repair damage he hadn't caused. He said to tell you something, David continued. He said, justice isn't about punishment. It's about making things whole again. David paused. I think my wife would have liked that. Ray folded the check and put it in his pocket. What happens now? Now you face the music. Prison, probably. Loss of pension, definitely. The kind of consequences that real people live with when they make choices like yours. David turned to walk away, then stopped. But maybe, if you serve your time with dignity, if you use whatever years you have left to try to make amends, maybe my wife's faith in redemption won't have been misplaced. Ray watched David Chen walk away, this man who had lost everything but somehow found the strength to offer forgiveness. As the elevator doors closed, Ray was left alone with the scorch marks and the weight of his choices. His phone buzzed. Text from Marcus. My dad told me you're confessing. Thank you. For what it's worth, I'm sorry it came to this. We both could have been better. Ray typed back. See you in court. I'll make sure the whole truth comes out, including how you tried to protect me. Don't. I was part of the blackmail scheme, even if my motives were different. Let me face my own consequences. Ray smiled, despite everything. Marcus really had learned something from his parents, both the kindness and the accountability, too. Hours later, Ray walked into the FBI field office carrying a manila envelope containing his confession, David's security footage, and every piece of evidence of his crimes. The receptionist directed him to Agent Sarah Mitchell, a sharp-eyed woman who listened to his story with the kind of professional detachment that Ray recognized from his own interrogations. "Let me understand this," Agent Mitchell said after reviewing the confession. "You committed arson as revenge for a parking dispute, accidentally destroyed the wrong vehicle, then committed evidence tampering and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud to cover it up. That's correct, and you're confessing voluntarily. Because, ... Ray thought about David Chen talking to his dead wife in a burned-out Honda, about Marcus writing a check to repair damage he hadn't caused, about 23 years of seeking justice for victims, only to become the perpetrator in someone else's nightmare. "Because," Ray said, "I finally learned the difference between justice and revenge." 6 months later, Ray sat in a federal prison in Oregon, wearing orange instead of blue, studying law books instead of case files. His cell was small and sparse, but it was honest in a way his life hadn't been for a long time. He'd received 3 letters since his incarceration. The first was from Marcus letting him know that David had used the insurance money to establish a memorial fund in his wife's name, helping families pay for cancer treatment. The second was from his ex-wife, Karen, saying she was proud of him for finally doing the right thing. The third letter came from David Chen himself, written on simple, stationery, in careful handwriting. "Detective Hoffman, my son tells me you're studying to be a paralegal, helping other inmates with their appeals. He says you're good at it, that you understand justice in a way you never did before. I thought you should know that I've forgiven you, not because you deserve it, but because carrying that anger was burning me up from the inside. My wife used to say that forgiveness isn't about the person who wronged you, it's about freeing yourself from the fire. The Honda is gone, but the memories aren't. I've learned to talk to her in other places now. Sometimes I think she's listening. David Chen, P.S. Marcus, says to tell you that he finally learned to park in his assigned spot. Small victories." Ray folded the letter carefully and placed it in his law book, next to a photo of his parents that Karen had sent. Outside his cell, window, the Oregon sun, painted the prison yard in shades of orange and gold, and for the first time in years, Ray felt something like peace. He'd spent his career investigating fires, learning how they started and why they spread. Now he understood the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the only way to stop a fire from consuming everything is to let it burn out the parts of yourself that needed to be destroyed. Ray Hoffman had learned to set fires, but David and Marcus Chen had taught him how to rise from the ashes. Justice, it turned out, wasn't about the flames. It was about what grew in the scorched earth afterward.